Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, where love begins with the smallest mistakes and the most unexpected moments. It all started with a stormy Seattle morning. Nora Bennett, a broke single mom, was running late for her first day at a new job. Desperate, exhausted, and soaked to the bone. Her Uber canceled last minute, and in a panic, she jumped into the first black car that stopped for her. But the man behind the wheel wasn't her driver. He was calm, confident, and far too handsome to be an Uber driver. When they arrived, he turned to her with a faint smile and said, "Adrian Hale, CEO of Halcyon Dynamics, and you, Ms. Bennett, are my new assistant." What began as a humiliating mistake would soon become the start of something extraordinary. A story of second chances, ambition, and a love born from the most unlikely ride of all. She didn't just enter the wrong car. She just stepped into the most unexpected beginning of her life. The rain fell over Seattle like it had no intention of stopping. It was the kind of steady, relentless downpour that turned the city into a watercolor painting. Blurred lights, smeared colors, and streets glistening like liquid mirrors. Nora Bennett hurried along the slick sidewalk, clutching her phone in one hand and her son's tiny fingers in the other. Her thin coat clung to her like a second skin, soaked through from the cold drizzle. On her cracked phone screen, the Uber app blinked, "Arriving now." A sigh of relief escaped her. For once this morning, something was going right. Her babysitter had canceled at dawn, her car had given up on life 2 nights ago, and now she was late for the most important day of her career. Her first day at Halcyon Dynamics. A job she prayed would finally give her and 5-year-old Eli a chance to start over. "Mommy, my socks are wet," Eli mumbled, dragging his little feet through the puddles. His dinosaur backpack hung loosely off one shoulder, the spikes floppy and damp. "I know, baby. We'll dry them when we get there, okay?" Nora said softly, brushing raindrops from his forehead. Her voice trembled between exhaustion and determination. She couldn't afford to be late. Not today, not when the rent notice still sat unopened on her counter. A gray sedan slowed beside the curb, headlights slicing through the fog. Same model, same color as the one on her app. Without a second thought, Nora opened the back door and ushered Eli inside. "Thank you so much," she said breathlessly, sliding in after him and shaking the rain from her sleeves. "Halcyon Tower downtown, please, and sorry if we're a little messy. My son's been sick." The man behind the wheel turned slightly toward her voice. He wasn't what she expected. No Uber sticker on the window, no worn hoodie or baseball cap. He looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom. Charcoal shirt rolled to the elbows, an expensive watch glinting beneath the dashboard light. His eyes were steady, the color of dark steel. "Halcyon Dynamics," he repeated in a smooth tone. "That's quite a company." Nora smiled nervously, clutching her bag. "Yeah, it's my first day. I still can't believe they hired me. If I make it there without another disaster, I'll call it a win." "You've had one of those mornings?" She laughed softly, the sound tight. "More like one of those years. My car broke down. I've been applying everywhere for months, and this Uber, well, it's a luxury I can't really afford. But this job could change everything." "What position?" "Administrative assistant," she said quickly. "Not glamorous, but it's stable. Health insurance, childcare support, stuff people don't think about until they're gone." Her voice softened. "For us, it's a big deal." He nodded slightly, eyes fixed on the road. "Hope's a powerful reason to show up." Eli coughed quietly in the back seat, a deep, scratchy sound. Nora reached over to adjust his blanket, her fingers brushing his forehead. "He's had this cough for days. I wanted to keep him home, but I can't call in sick on my first day. The company has daycare, so I'm hoping they'll take him for now." "You sound like someone who always finds a way," the man said. "Someone who doesn't have a choice," she corrected gently. "There's a difference." He didn't argue, but a small smile curved at the corner of his mouth. For a while, the car was quiet, except for the sound of rain drumming on the roof. Nora stared out the window, watching the world blur past. Her chest felt heavy, not just from nerves but from everything that had led here. The layoffs, the nights eating cereal for dinner, the feeling of constantly running out of time. Then, his voice broke through her thoughts. "Do you always apologize for being human?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You've said sorry at least 6 times since you got in," he said evenly. "For being late, for your son, for existing. You don't have to apologize for surviving." The words hit deeper than she expected. She met his eyes in the mirror, surprised by the quiet understanding there. "I guess I've just learned the world doesn't have much patience for people who don't have it together." "Maybe the world needs more people who admit they don't," he replied, his voice low but certain. Nora looked away, fighting a sudden sting behind her eyes. He was just a stranger. But something about the way he said it, without judgment, without pity, made her chest tighten. When the silence returned, it was comfortable, almost peaceful. For the first time that morning, she didn't feel like she was drowning. As the car turned into downtown traffic, the rain eased into a mist. The glass tower of Halcyon Dynamics loomed ahead, sleek, mirrored, intimidating. Nora's heart thudded against her ribs. "There it is," she murmured. "Wish me luck." The man's gaze flicked to her in the mirror again. "You won't need it," she smiled faintly. "You sound sure of that." "I am." They pulled up to the front entrance. Nora reached for her phone to tip him, only to find her app blank. No fare, no driver, no ride history. "Wait, that's weird," she muttered. "It's like this trip doesn't exist." The man turned in his seat, finally facing her fully. Up close, he looked even more striking, calm, confident, and unmistakably out of place behind a steering wheel. "That's because this isn't an Uber," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I'm sorry, or what?" He tilted his head slightly, almost apologetic, but not quite. "Your driver canceled right before I pulled up. You were standing in the rain with your son, looking like the world had given up on you. I was heading this way anyway, so you just decided to pick us up?" "I couldn't leave you there," he said simply. Her stomach twisted. "Wait, do you work at Halcyon?" A small amused glint flickered in his eyes. "You could say that." Before she could process what that meant, he was already stepping out, circling around to open her door. "Come on, you'll catch a cold standing here." Still dazed, Nora gathered Eli and followed him inside. The lobby of Halcyon Tower gleamed like a cathedral of glass and steel. Employees greeted him with polite nods, their eyes filled with recognition. Nora frowned, confused. The elevator door slid open and he pressed the top floor. She said hesitantly. "I think HR is on 23. He turned to her then, extending a hand with quiet composure. "Adrian Hale," he said, "CEO of Halcyon Dynamics. And if I'm not mistaken, you're my new executive assistant." Time stopped. The air left her lungs. You're the CEO?" she managed, eyes wide. "I thought you were a driver." His tone was calm, lightly amused. "Oh my God." Her face burned. "I told you about my car, my bills, how desperate I was, and I listened," he said gently. "That's not something people do often enough." Nora shook her head, mortified. "I must have sounded pathetic." "You sounded real," he corrected. "That's rarer than you think." She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You're not firing me?" "Why would I?" he asked softly. "You told the truth. That's exactly what I need on my team." As the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, Nora followed him out, her heart still pounding. Rainwater dripped from her sleeves, but somehow, she didn't feel cold anymore. Maybe fate had a strange sense of humor. Maybe some mistakes weren't mistakes at all. She looked at the man walking ahead of her, her new boss, the stranger who had picked her up in the rain, and felt something shift deep inside her. Because that morning, Nora Bennett hadn't just stepped into the wrong car. She had stepped straight into the beginning of the rest of her life. For the first time in years, Nora felt seen. Not as a single mom, not as an assistant, but as herself. The elevator felt too quiet, the hum of its motion pressing against Nora's racing heartbeat. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored wall, rain-soaked, nervous, and completely out of place beside the man who now stood only a few feet away. "Adrian Hale, the CEO of Halcyon Dynamics," She could still hear his words echoing in her head, calm and certain, while every nerve in her body screamed that this was a disaster. When the doors opened to the executive floor, the space hit her like a wave of silence. Everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, soft light over polished floors. Adrian walked ahead without hurry, and she followed because there was nothing else to do. The world she stepped into didn't belong to her. It belonged to people who wore confidence like armor. She just wore exhaustion. He led her into a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "Please sit," he said, and even though his tone was kind, her legs still trembled. She sat carefully, clutching her bag like a shield. "Mr. Hale," she began, her voice low and shaky, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea who you were. He lifted a hand, stopping her gently. "You've apologized enough for one morning, Nora. You got in the wrong car. That's all?" She let out a short laugh, incredulous. "That's all? I basically gave you my life story in 20 minutes. "You did," he said with the faintest smile, "and it told me more about you than your resume ever could." She blinked, unable to tell if he was serious. "You're not angry?" "No," he said simply. "HR made an error. You were hired as my executive assistant, not as an admin clerk. I plan to meet you later today. Seems the universe had other plans." Nora's eyes widened. "Executive assistant? That can't be right. I've never even—" "Experience can be learned," he interrupted. "Character can't." The sentence landed softly but deep. She wasn't sure what to say, so she followed when he stood. "Let's take care of Eli first. Daycare's on the 3rd floor. You'll work better knowing he's safe." She tried to protest. "You really don't have to." But his look silenced her. "I want to," he said. In the elevator, Eli clung to his mother's hand, studying Adrian curiously. "Are you Mommy's boss?" The words made Nora's stomach twist. Adrian crouched down, smiling faintly. "Something like that. You must be Eli." "I'm brave," the boy declared. "Mostly when I get ice cream." Adrian chuckled softly. "Noted." A few minutes later, the daycare staff welcomed them with warmth. Eli was soon surrounded by crayons, a tiny fortress of picture books around him. Nora stood watching, reluctant to leave. Adrian's voice came beside her, quiet but steady. "He'll be fine. They're good people here. And it's included in your benefits." Her eyes stung unexpectedly. "You didn't have to do this." He met her gaze. "If you're worried about him, you can't do your best work. This isn't charity, Nora. It's practicality, and I like practical." "You sound more like a father than a CEO," she murmured. "Maybe those two things shouldn't be so far apart," he replied. When they returned to his office, a woman from HR was waiting with a file. "Mr. Hale, the offer letter error is confirmed," she said briskly, handing it to him. "Thank you, Anna." He skimmed the page, then handed it to Nora. "See? The system agrees with me." She glanced down, reading her name beneath the bold title, Executive Assistant to the CEO. "This has to be a mistake," she whispered. "It isn't," he said simply. "Why me?" she asked. He leaned against the edge of his desk, folding his arms. "Because when I spoke to you this morning, you were honest. You didn't pretend. You told me about the job applications, the fear, the exhaustion. That kind of honesty is rare, and I value it." She searched his face, unsure if he was serious or just being kind. "So my nervous breakdown in your car got me promoted?" "It showed me who you are," he said, "and that's what I need next to me." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Nora filled out new paperwork while Adrian briefed her on schedules, meetings, and policies. He moved with quiet precision, never rushed, never harsh. The more time she spent near him, the more she noticed things most people probably missed. How he paused before speaking. How he actually listened. How his confidence didn't feel like arrogance. By noon, the whispers had already started. Everyone on the executive floor knew the story. The new assistant who arrived soaking wet and somehow came up with the CEO. Every smile felt curious, every handshake carried polite intrigue. Nora pretended not to notice. She buried herself in work, focusing on numbers, documents, anything but the memory of those gray eyes in the mirror. Later that afternoon, she stood by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Her reflection looked foreign, a woman out of her depth but still standing. When Adrian returned from a meeting, she straightened instinctively. "How are you adjusting?" he asked. "Trying not to faint," she admitted, earning a small smile. "You're doing fine," he said. "Better than fine." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Hiring someone who literally thought you were her Uber?" He tilted his head, considering. "Not for a second. Why?" "Because you were honest before you knew who I was. That tells me everything I need to know about how you'll handle the rest." His tone was calm, but carried something else, something that made her pulse skip. By the time the day ended, the office had emptied. The light from the city bled into the glass walls, casting reflections that made everything look softer, almost dreamlike. Nora shut down her computer, feeling both exhausted and strangely alive. As she gathered her things, Adrian appeared at her doorway. "Long first day," he said. "You survived." "Barely," she replied with a smile. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me there's been a mix-up." "Does it feel like one?" he asked. She thought of Eli laughing in the daycare, of the quiet kindness in his voice, of the strange calm that had followed her all day. "No," she said softly. "It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'll see you tomorrow, Nora." He turned to leave, then paused. "And for the record," he added without looking back, "you're allowed to stop apologizing now." When the door closed behind him, she sat back down for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Through the window, Seattle's skyline shimmered in the after-rain light, and something inside her eased. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was faking it, or fighting to belong. She didn't feel invisible. For the first time in years, Nora Bennett felt seen, not as a single mom, not as an assistant, but as herself. He told himself it was admiration, but every time she smiled, it felt dangerously close to something else. The next morning came quietly. The storm had passed, leaving Seattle washed in gray light and the scent of rain on steel. Nora arrived early, earlier than anyone else, clutching a coffee that was more necessity than luxury. She still half expected someone from HR to stop her in the lobby and say it had all been a mistake. But when she reached the executive floor, her desk was there. Organized, waiting, hers. She took a breath, sat down, and got to work. Adrian Hale didn't arrive until an hour later, crisp and composed as always. He nodded when he saw her, a silent acknowledgement that made her heart skip for reasons she didn't want to examine. "Morning, Nora," he said simply. "Morning, Mr. Hale," she replied, forcing professionalism into her voice. But when their eyes met, something unspoken lingered. A quiet recognition that yesterday's chaos had changed something between them. By noon, she was buried in color-coded schedules, phone calls, and urgent emails. The company's upcoming product launch had hit turbulence after a leak on social media, a minor detail twisted into a rumor about layoffs. Adrian's phone had been buzzing nonstop, and tension hummed through the building. When he returned from a terse meeting, Nora looked up from her monitor. "I've drafted a revised meeting schedule," she said calmly. "You had 6 today, but 3 can be merged to free up time for a PR briefing." He paused, scanning the updated calendar she handed him. "You did this already?" "It seemed urgent," she said simply. "You needed space to handle the crisis, not drown in meetings that could have been emails." His brow lifted slightly, not disapproving, but surprised. "You're not afraid to take initiative." "I'm a single mom," she said lightly. "Initiative is a survival skill." Something flickered behind his eyes, respect, maybe even amusement. "Good. Keep going." Over the next week, Nora's instincts proved invaluable. She streamlined communication between departments, handled media inquiries with calm efficiency, and quietly prevented 3 scheduling disasters before they reached Adrian's desk. People noticed. More than once, he caught his senior staff glancing at her with curiosity. This newcomer who'd appeared out of nowhere but somehow kept things running smoother than before. Late one Thursday night, Long after most of the office lights had gone dark, Nora was still at her desk, sorting through contracts. Adrian stepped out of his office, jacket slung over his arm. "You're still here?" She looked up, blinking tiredly. "Just finishing these reports. I didn't want to leave them over the weekend." He studied her for a moment, before setting his jacket down and loosening his tie. "You shouldn't be the last one here." "You are," she said softly. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Touché." The clock ticked quietly between them. Outside, the city glowed in distant streaks of light, reflected in the glass. For a while they just worked, two silhouettes in the hum of after-hours quiet. Then Adrian broke the silence. "You've adjusted quickly," he said. "Most people spend their first month trying not to drown." "I didn't have much choice," she said. "When your kid depends on you, failure stops being an option." He nodded slowly. "You do everything for him." "Yes." Her voice softened. "He's my reason, my anchor." She hesitated before adding, "Sometimes I wonder what he'll think of me when he's older, if he'll understand why things were hard, why I couldn't give him more." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "He'll see what you built from nothing. That's what children remember. Not the lack, the effort." She smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering in the dim light. "Did you have someone who taught you that?" His jaw tightened slightly. "No. My father taught me something else entirely, that success isn't about effort. It's about control, discipline, perfection." There was bitterness there, quiet but sharp. Nora didn't press, just watched him carefully. "And did it work?" "For the company," he said. "For me, not so much." Silence fell again, heavy but not uncomfortable. She could see now what others probably didn't. The edges beneath his calm exterior, the kind of loneliness that no amount of wealth could erase. For the first time, she didn't see a CEO. She saw a man carrying too much, the same way she did. Days blurred into weeks. Their rhythm settled. Coffee at 7, meetings at 9, briefings through the afternoon. Nora became the quiet force behind Adrian's composure, predicting problems before they happened, offering ideas that made him pause. He started asking for her opinion more often, not just about logistics, but about strategy, even people. It became their pattern, his logic, her empathy. One night, while reviewing an internal memo about employee morale, Nora hesitated before speaking. "Can I say something without overstepping?" "Please do," he said. "People don't just need clear instructions, Adrian," she said gently. "They need to feel seen. Right now they're scared about rumors. Maybe you should address it directly, not through PR, but as yourself." He looked at her, expression unreadable, then leaned back slowly. "You think transparency will fix fear?" "I think pretending there's nothing to be afraid of makes it worse," she replied. "You don't need to promise perfection, just honesty." He considered that for a long moment before nodding. "You're right." And he did it. The next morning, Adrian held a live meeting with the entire company, speaking candidly about the challenges, the rumors, and his vision moving forward. It wasn't rehearsed or polished. It was human, and when the applause echoed through the building, his eyes found Nora's across the crowd. A silent thank you passed between them. That night, as the office emptied again, he lingered by her desk. "You were right," he said quietly. "They needed honesty," she smiled. "Told you." "Remind me never to doubt you again," he said, half teasing. "Remind me to record that," she shot back. He laughed softly, the sound low and rare. It did something to her chest she couldn't quite name. They started sharing late-night coffee breaks, stolen minutes between exhaustion and quiet understanding. Sometimes he'd tell her small things, about his father, about inheriting the company too young, about how success didn't silence loneliness. Other times, she'd talk about the things she'd left behind. College dreams paused after discovering she was pregnant at 19. "I wanted to be a designer," she admitted one evening, eyes on her mug. "Fashion, maybe interior, but then Eli came, and I traded sketches for grocery lists." "You still could," he said simply. She looked at him, half amused. Adrian, I can barely afford new shoes, let alone tuition. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. I didn't ask if you could. I said you could. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. You really believe that? I don't believe in wasted potential, he said. Least of all yours. The way he said it made her breath catch. For a second, it wasn't about encouragement. It was something deeper, something neither of them were ready to acknowledge. Later, when she left the office, she didn't see the small note he wrote to HR the next morning. Review candidate for continuing education scholarship, N. Bennett. Weeks passed, and their connection grew in the quiet spaces. The way his tone softened when he spoke to her, the way her laughter seemed to ease the tension in his shoulders. People noticed, of course, whispers floated through hallways, half curious, half speculative. But neither of them gave it shape. It existed in glances, in pauses that lasted a beat too long, in conversations that lingered past midnight. One evening, as they reviewed quarterly reports, she caught him watching her. What? She asked, smiling faintly. He hesitated, then said, You remind me that there's more to leadership than strategy. She tilted her head. And what's that? Grace, he said softly. And patience. Her cheeks warmed. I think that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Then people haven't been paying enough attention, he murmured. The air between them shifted, not charged, but alive. He looked away first, focusing on the screen, his composure slipping just enough for her to see the truth underneath. He cared more than he wanted to admit. That night, after she left, Adrian stood by the window, watching the reflection of the city lights. He told himself it was admiration, for her work, her resilience, her courage. But every time she smiled, every time her laughter filled the silence he'd grown too used to, it felt dangerously close to something else. And deep down, he already knew what that something was. Maybe the lie wasn't meant to deceive. Maybe it was meant to reveal who they both really were. The city outside had changed. It wasn't just the skyline. It was the rhythm of Nora's life. A year had passed since that rainy morning, but sometimes she could still hear the echo of raindrops against the car window, still remember the way his voice sounded when he said her name for the first time. Now she stood in the same building, no longer the nervous assistant in borrowed heels. She was confident, composed, the woman people came to for answers. Nora Bennett had become the quiet heartbeat of Halcyon Dynamics. Projects flowed smoother under her watch. Departments that had once clashed now worked in harmony because she understood what Adrian always said he wanted the company to be: human. And perhaps that's what he admired most about her. She had managed to bring warmth into the cold architecture of success. That afternoon, the office was alive with celebration. The new quarterly report had exceeded expectations, and Adrian had credited strong leadership and empathy at every level. Nora had smiled when he looked her way during the announcement, even as she tried to hide it behind her coffee cup. She was happy, proud, and for once, content. But contentment never lasted long with Adrian Hale. As she was packing up for the day, a short message appeared on her monitor. My office. Before you go. Nora's stomach fluttered. The tone was too brief, too formal. She walked down the quiet hallway, each step sounding louder than it should have. When she entered, Adrian was standing by the wide glass window. The city sprawled beneath him like a reflection of everything he carried. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his tie sat loosened, a rare sign of fatigue. But it wasn't just tiredness in his face. It was something else. You wanted to see me? She asked, closing the door behind her. He turned slowly, eyes meeting hers. Yes, sit down, please. Her pulse quickened. Is everything all right? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked around his desk, rested his hands against the edge, and studied her. You've been here a year, Nora. In that time, you've reorganized half this company, guided me through more crises than I care to count, and somehow made me believe in this place again. She smiled, unsure where this was going. That's what you hired me for, isn't it? That's what I told myself, he said quietly. Something in his tone made her nerves tighten. Told yourself? He drew a slow breath as if bracing for impact. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago. The silence stretched. She could hear her own heartbeat. I'm listening, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her eyes. The day we met? That morning in the rain. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Nora froze. What do you mean? He held her gaze. I knew who you were before you ever stepped into that car. Her stomach dropped. You what? I saw your file weeks before your interview, he said, his voice steady but softer now. I read your letter. You wrote about losing everything. About trying to rebuild for your son. You were honest, vulnerable. There was something about your words, something I couldn't shake. Nora's throat felt dry. You read my personal letter to HR? Yes, he admitted. And I told myself I wanted to understand the person behind it. When I saw you that morning, standing in the rain, trying to get your son into a car that never came, I recognized you. So I stopped. Her eyes widened, disbelief and confusion warring inside her. You're telling me you pulled over on purpose? That you knew I'd think you were my driver? He nodded slowly. I didn't plan it in advance. I just acted. And when you spoke, when you told me about your life, about your fears, it didn't feel like an interview anymore. It felt real. I wanted to meet that version of you, the one who wasn't trying to impress me. Her voice trembled with anger. So you let me make a fool of myself? You sat there, listening to me ramble about rent and daycare and being terrified. And you already knew everything? Nora, no, she cut in sharply, standing now. You had every advantage. You knew my story, my desperation, my weaknesses. And you just let me walk into that room thinking fate put us in the same car. It wasn't about manipulation, he said, stepping closer. It was about truth. Truth? She repeated, her voice breaking. You built everything between us on a lie. I didn't lie, he said quietly. I didn't tell you. There's a difference. That's not a difference, she snapped. That's cowardice. He flinched, just slightly, but his tone stayed calm. You're right to be angry. I crossed a line I shouldn't have. But you have to understand, I wasn't trying to test you. I was trying to see if what I read on paper was real. She laughed bitterly. So this was what, your little experiment? Observe the struggling single mom. See how she performs under pressure? His jaw tightened. Don't reduce it to that. You think I did this for amusement? Nora, I saw something in you that reminded me what I'd forgotten about this company. About myself. She stared at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. You keep saying you saw me, but did you ever stop to think that maybe I wanted to choose how I was seen? That stopped him cold. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Finally, he said softly, You're right. I didn't give you that choice, and for that I'm sorry. Nora took a shaky breath, trying to hold herself together. You know what hurts the most? It's not that you knew. It's that you let me believe I was lucky that morning. Like the universe had finally given me a break. But it wasn't luck, was it? It was you. He swallowed hard, his voice low. Maybe both. She looked away, blinking fast. You should have told me, Adrian. You should have trusted me enough to start honestly. I should have, he agreed. But if I had, would you have ever spoken to me the way you did that day? Would you have let me see the real you? Her answer came without hesitation. Yes, because that's who I am. I didn't need a test to prove it. He exhaled, defeated. You're right. You never did. For a moment, neither moved. The air felt charged, fragile. Then he turned toward his desk and picked up a file. That's why this conversation isn't about guilt, he said, sliding the folder toward her. It's about recognition. She frowned, opening it. The document inside bore her name in bold print. Head of People Operations. She looked up sharply. What is this? A promotion, he said. Official, already approved by the board. After everything you just told me, you're promoting me? I'm doing what I should have done months ago, he said. This company runs better because of you. You've changed how people work, how they connect. You deserve the title that reflects that. Her voice shook. You think a new title fixes what you did? No, he said simply. But it's the truth you've earned, and I won't let my mistake erase that. She closed the folder slowly. You always know how to make things sound noble, Adrian. But underneath it, it's still betrayal. He nodded once. Maybe it is. But I'd rather you hate me for telling the truth than keep trusting me under a lie. Her gaze softened, though her voice stayed steady. You don't make it easy to stay angry with you. I never meant to, he said with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The silence returned, quieter this time, almost tender. Then she asked, "Why tell me now?" He hesitated. "Because I realized I couldn't keep building something real on top of something false." "Not with you," her breath caught. "Not with you." The way he said it carried weight she didn't dare name. For a long time, they just looked at each other, two people tangled in the same truth, standing on opposite sides of it. Finally, she whispered, "If you'd told me the truth that day, I still would have gotten in that car." He blinked, taken aback. "You would have?" "Yes," she said. "Because even then I needed a chance. I just wish you'd given it to me without a secret attached." Adrian's voice was barely a murmur. "I wish that too." When she turned to leave, he said softly, "Nora." But she stopped him with a look that said not now. She gathered the folder and walked to the door, pausing for a moment before glancing back at him. His expression was unreadable, a mix of regret and something far deeper. Then she left. Adrian stood alone in the quiet, staring at the faint reflection of her in the glass as the door closed behind her. The city glowed below, indifferent to the storm that had just passed inside his office. He told himself it was admiration. Admiration for her integrity, for her courage, for the way she never let him hide behind his power. But every time she smiled, every time she challenged him, every time she looked at him like he was both the problem and the answer, it felt dangerously close to something else. And maybe, just maybe, the lie he told that day wasn't meant to deceive. Maybe it was meant to reveal who they both really were. She got into the wrong car that morning, but it drove her straight into the life she was meant to find. Time has a strange way of softening what once hurt. The memory of that confrontation, the truth between Nora and Adrian, had lived quietly in the corners of her mind, not as a wound anymore, but as a lesson. What followed wasn't an easy road. Trust had to be rebuilt, slowly and carefully, like a house made of glass. But they did rebuild it. Months turned into seasons. Projects came and went, and somewhere between the late nights and the quiet mornings, between board meetings and school runs, Nora and Adrian found their way back to each other, not through apology, but through understanding. 3 years later, the woman standing in front of the mirror barely resembled the one who once stumbled into the wrong car. Nora Hale. Yes, she had kept her name professionally, but the change was unmistakable. Was now a leader, a visionary in her own right. Her degree in business and communications hung framed on her office wall, next to a photo of Eli holding a balloon at her graduation ceremony. She had done it. Finished college while raising a child and running a company division. Adrian had been there for every late-night study session, every test she doubted herself on, every quiet victory she pretended wasn't a big deal. And now, she stood in front of the new sign gleaming outside Halcyon's headquarters. The Empower Initiative, supporting single mothers in technology. It was her idea. Her dream. Funded by Halcyon, endorsed by Adrian, built by her. The lobby was filled with women, young, nervous, determined, clutching folders, resumes, and a spark of hope that reminded Nora of herself years ago. As she walked onto the stage to deliver her speech, she caught Adrian's eyes in the crowd. He wasn't at the front, not in the spotlight. He stood in the back, arms folded, watching her the way he always did. Not as her boss, not as a savior, but as a partner. When she spoke, her voice was clear, steady. "A few years ago, I thought my life had already been written," she said, glancing toward Eli, now 8, grinning proudly from the front row. But life has a way of surprising us when we think we're stuck. Sometimes the things that go wrong are what set us right. Applause filled the room, but what she heard most was her own heartbeat, strong and calm. When she stepped off the stage, Adrian met her with a quiet smile. "You were incredible," he said softly. "Coming from you, That means something, she teased. But her voice was warm. It should, he said, eyes glinting with pride. You built something extraordinary, Nora. You changed lives, not just mine. She gave him a look. You mean ours? He nodded. Ours, he echoed. And for a brief moment, it felt like the rest of the world faded away. Later that evening, after the event, they took a drive outside the city. It was rare for them to have time alone. Their lives had become a constant blur of meetings, school plays, and decisions that mattered to hundreds of people. But tonight the air was light. The rain had fallen earlier, leaving the roads glistening, a quiet echo of how it all began. Eli was asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window. Nora looked out at the skyline glowing in the distance. Do you ever think about it? She asked softly. About what? That morning, she said. The wrong car, the rain, everything that came after. Adrian smiled faintly. Every day. She turned to him. Would you change it if you could? He thought for a long moment before answering. No. Because even if it started with a lie, everything real that followed came from truth. Nora looked at him for a while, the quiet hum of the engine filling the space between them. You always know how to make words sound right, she murmured. He chuckled. Maybe because I spent so long getting them wrong. When they reached home, a house tucked in a quiet corner of Bellevue, warm light spilling from the windows, Eli stirred awake. Adrian carried him inside while Nora lingered by the car, staring up at the night sky. It had stopped raining, but the air still smelled like it. Inside, Eli mumbled sleepily. Good night, Mommy. Good night, Dad. The word still made Adrian pause every time. Not because it was new, but because it still felt miraculous. Nora smiled, brushing Eli's hair back before he drifted off. Then she turned to Adrian, who stood behind her with a look she knew well, quiet, unreadable, yet full of feeling. What? She asked softly. He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself. You've been at my side for 4 years now. You've changed this company. You've raised a son who's turning into a better man than either of us deserve. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you changed me too. Nora tilted her head, cautious but smiling. You're saying that like it's a bad thing? It's not, he said, his tone low. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. She laughed softly, the sound nervous but sweet. Adrian, what are you... But before she could finish, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He didn't kneel, didn't make a grand speech. He just opened it, revealing a simple silver ring that caught the light. I thought about doing this 100 different ways, he said. But every time I tried, it felt wrong, too formal, too perfect. The truth is, I don't want perfect. I just want us... Nora's breath caught. You're serious. More than I've ever been, he said quietly. We've built everything together. Trust, friendship, love, even when it wasn't easy. You gave me back my faith in people, in life, and I can't imagine spending another day without you in it. Not as my assistant, not as my partner at work, but as my wife. Tears shimmered in her eyes before she could stop them. You really had to propose in the living room next to a pile of Legos? He smiled softly. It's where our life actually happens. I figured it was fitting. She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. You really do make it hard to say no. Then don't, he said, stepping closer. Nora looked down at the ring, then back up at him. The man who had once been a stranger behind a steering wheel, now the anchor of everything she'd built. She took a deep breath and whispered, Yes. Adrian exhaled, relief and joy mingling in a smile that reached his eyes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, the world outside falling away. In the corner, Eli stirred, blinking sleepily. Are you guys done being mushy? He mumbled. Nora laughed, wiping her eyes. Go back to sleep, sweetheart. He grinned faintly. Only if I get cake tomorrow. Deal, Adrian said, still holding Nora close. Later that night, after Eli was tucked in and the house fell quiet, Nora stood by the window, looking out at the city lights flickering in the distance. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You know, she said softly. Sometimes I think about all the things that had to go wrong for my life to end up right. He rested his chin on her shoulder. Funny how that works, isn't it? She smiled. Yeah, it is. They stayed like that for a long time. No words, no need for any. Just the hum of quiet peace that came from knowing they had already lived through the hardest parts. Years from now. People would tell the story differently, about the CEO and the assistant, the company and the scandal, the rain and the ride, but the truth was simpler than that. It was about two people who had been broken in different ways, who somehow helped each other heal, who found love not in perfection, but in the beautiful mess of chance. And as the night deepened, Nora's reflection in the glass smiled back at her. The same woman, yet entirely new. She got into the wrong car that morning, but it drove her straight into the life she was meant to find. And that was the life she never expected. A story about how a single moment, one wrong turn, can lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Sometimes the rain doesn't ruin our plans. It simply washes the path clean. If you felt something in this story, hope, warmth, maybe a little love, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Veil of Hearts for more stories that remind us how unexpected love can be. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep believing in second chances.